Good afternoon, everybody. We're still here at the PAAB conference at Rainbow Towers, and it's been quite an exciting conference so far. We've had the president of the nation speak. We've had Mtuli. We've had all sorts of people, CEOs. I think it's been well attended, one could say, and really robust plenary sessions that we've had so far. What are your thoughts, Zia?
Look, it's been quite an engaging affair. So this is day 2. The first day also we saw some very good speakers tackling different issues around reporting and the current issues that are there. Also today I sat through one session that really inspired me when the first black chartered accountant, Mr. Kudenga, sort of chronicled his story, how he started and when he qualified, and what he went through, trying to ensure that the accounting profession, admits more and more black Zimbabweans. And there were some sessions on corporate governance, some sessions on ESG, carbon credit, and so what I would expect maybe going forward is after such a session it has to be some not just talking points but some resolutions, and say, okay, fine, what do you expect to achieve in the next 12 months, so that before the start of next year's session they take stock. Otherwise we'll just have another event where people sit around
another
a talk show and nothing really comes out of it. And you then marvel at the level of knowledge and expertise that was in the room. If only we could harness that and channel it properly, I think that would really have a positive impact on the country, the economy, and our society in general.
And Shumba, your thoughts on the conference so far?
Look, I think we've had very interesting conversations. The plenary sessions were fantastic, and it's just listening to Zia's synopsis. It's just remarkable, the gap between the level of experience, competence, and qualification of our professional class and what we actually see on the ground in the economy, because we have a policy framework that doesn't really bring out the best of the talent that we actually have. So a part of me actually was to some extent saddened that we've got this amazing professional class that's handicapped in the formal sector and is, not really able to punch, above their weight.
Absolutely. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's always, every time we attend these conferences, it's always very interesting, and it's always a different perspective, because lots of people are looking at the same problem, but they're tackling it from a different perspective all the time. And I think that it's very useful. And actually, the people we sit down with, those conversations are worthwhile. So, gentlemen, for this session, what I want us to do is to really reconcile with President Trump in America and what has happened as far as the tariffs are concerned. Just as an update, just to let our viewers, so that they quickly catch up with what's turning out to be a whirlwind of events. So I think the latest that we have is they've paused for 90 days, and it's reciprocal, 10% tariffs on everybody while they negotiate, and the negotiations are such that they can actually come down to zero, and they're looking at non-tariff barriers to trade. So I think that's a possible win for the Trump administration. For those that looked at what Trump was doing purely from a negotiating perspective. But obviously, there are those who are looking at it from a protectionist view. I think that they would not be happy about this. But I think that Trump is a deal maker, and it's always about making deals. But subsequent to that, he raised the tariffs on China. So it's quite clear that he's isolated China from everybody else. So with everybody else, over 70 countries, he says we're willing to negotiate, we're willing to have discussions. But with China, they've doubled down. So they've actually increased tariffs, and I think the latest is over 100%.
Yeah, over 100% for sure.
Yeah, and it looks like he will double down even further. And the memes have not stopped since.
They're hilarious.
But also what we've seen is the stock market has rebounded. I mean, when you look at the New York Stock Exchange, the Nasdaq, they went up by over 10% in just one day trade. And today we've seen them continuing to gain. We've also seen the 10-year bond ease a little. I think it had gone down and then it had spiked up. So it's not good for volatility. Anyone who actually looks at this from a volatility perspective, I think that what we've gone through over the last 2 weeks is definitely not good as far as volatility is concerned. But I think that the market is now discounting a settlement of sort, that even beyond the 90 days, I think what we're going to see is at the most 10% reciprocal tariffs with everybody else, and China, that might be an ongoing fight. But the market is happy with that. Would that be a good synopsis of where we are, or do you want to add or subtract?
Yeah, look, I think it's a good synopsis. I'm all for free trade and a zero tariff universe. And although I think the way this trade war has been initiated is messy, I see a silver lining in at the end of this process a global framework with lower tariffs all around. So I'm cautiously optimistic that when this is all over, when the smoke clears and the dust settles, we will have lower tariffs all around. But it remains to be seen. I think the challenge with this sort of
is this a win for Trump, or this is actually Trump with his tail between his legs?
The pros?
Yeah.
I think. Well, it just depends on which end of the aisle you're opining from. I try to be objective, and the way I think about it is I don't think it's either a win or a lose, by the way. I think he was very aggressive in announcing tariffs that were reciprocal or symmetric with all the major trading partners, because the fact of the matter is that the US generally had significantly lower tariffs than all of its major trading partners. A scenario from Trump's perspective that was unfair, and he was saying, look guys, why do you have free access to our market and we have to jump through this tariff hoop to get into your market? So I think from a fairness perspective, it's a reasonable case that he was making, but he was very aggressive in announcing tariffs. And for the most part, the countries with the higher tariffs on the US, instead of escalating in return, have decided, hey, you know what, let's negotiate. So I think so I will call it a win or a loss at the end of the negotiation process. If there's an agreement and they normalize their tariff regime, if they go to zero,
I think the market is already discounting that.
So I think normalized. So yeah, so the people who don't like Trump will say, he's back down, he's caved, he's lost. And the ardent Trump supporters are going to say no. He's got all of them to reach out and negotiate. So, but I think it's early days. I think it's really.
You know what my definition of a win-win is? It's if everybody on either side can claim the win. So if Trump supporters can claim the win, and if non-Trump supporters can claim the win, then it's a win-win. That's what a win-win is. And I think that...
Or it's a loss-loss.
Well, this is beneficial, right? In many ways, because I think that tariffs getting closer to zero around the world is a net benefit for all consumers around the world, not just American consumers.
Yeah, and for the market. I think markets do better with free trade, right? Because if you think about it from a Zimbabwean's perspective, right? the idea that we could be self-sufficient in everything that we need to lead a normal life is absurd to me, right? Where there's no way we are going to make cell phones and every component of a cell phone here and be completely self-sufficient, right? It probably makes sense that the chips are made in Taiwan by TSMC. It probably makes sense that the screen is made by, an expert in that some other part of the world. And we, as Zimbabweans, need to apply our minds to where we can be competitive on the global stage, where we have natural advantages. Like we've got this massive natural resource endowment, we've got all this arable land, so we can be a top tier player in certain spaces, right? So the idea that we can be all things to all people or completely self-sufficient, it's never going to work from a pragmatic standpoint. And so we need free trade. And we're better off for free trade.
Okay. So, Ranga, I want you to come in here because it's the first time that we've seen tariffs from a geopolitical position where tariffs are being used as a lever in geopolitical negotiations beyond just economics. So even in the world of politics, where previously we've seen sanctions, America would come up with all sorts of sanctions. We've seen them creating wars around the world where they feel an injustice or something. We've seen aid being used as an instrument of soft power, as they name it. But now we've got another lever, which is tariffs. And it looks like, just looking at just how the world responded, it looks like that is a very important lever to use in geopolitics. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's very important, especially in peacetime, where maybe nations are not engaged in a war that is sort of widespread. You want to say, okay, what are the tools that different nations can use to assert dominance or to raise issues if they've got an issue on the way they interact with the other countries. What's the best way of doing that? And when you look at maybe the recent trade wars, it's been over the past 2 decades we've seen China rising, and from a nation that used to be with its total GDP being much lower than the US, to where it is the second largest, and also in a way viewed by some to be actually threatening the US as number one position. Well, that's still arguable. But so that dominance, maybe in previous, in the past, that dominance could be, reflected in the wars, and you fight wars, you win them. Right now, it's about how big your economy is, how influential you are on the world trade front. So, look, I think I don't think anyone would have predicted it. It had to take someone who is very so unorthodox in the way they do their politics, in form of Trump, to do something that patently outrageous. But it looks like the results are going to be much better than maybe was feared. At first, I thought it was a dumb idea. I thought it was not necessary. I also felt like President Trump was trying to bully the world. But the fact that, each country that had been affected actually had some form of a tariff against the US just tells you that probably these other countries were benefiting at the expense of the Americans. And maybe
but not economically, the Americans were better off.
If
the Chinese are stupid enough to lend to a very rich American who wants to consume
So
perpetuity.
So the Americans were benefiting on that side. But in terms of the tariffs and the support that these other nations were giving,
the subsidies, the local industries,
then it was becoming an unfair, So maybe one would ask the question: is world trade going to be
relevant
or freer now than before? I say the answer is we're going to have to. We are with this move by Trump. It will take us closer and closer to free trade than before.
I tend to agree with that. I think that's
Yeah.
you know, sometimes the noise, when you look at something, the noise just makes it very haphazard and it looks gibberish. But when you zone out and you look at the direction, certainly the world is getting closer
to a free trade.
to freer trade than before. But there's something that, from a philosophical perspective, that I want you to look at is, why is it that the world does not understand that price wars are part and parcel of the free market system? Like, if there's a price war, then people say, or a trade war. I suppose we shouldn't use the word war, right? But a tax war, or whatever you want to call it, that people immediately, their reaction is, oh, it's bad, because it's bringing in uncertainty in the marketplace. But is that not part and parcel of a free market system, that at some point you will experience these price wars, and then it quietens down? And if you look at it from a prisoner's dilemma, it's good for the consumer at the end of the day. Let's take Zimbabwe, for example. Before Trump, we had 100% tariffs on cars, right? And it didn't matter where they were coming from. Post-Trump, we get cars at 0%. I mean, it's the other thing is we don't know whether or not they're gonna totally carry it out. But just that in itself, are Zimbabwean consumers not better off?
No, of course we're better off.
So the
and having access to the US market, we're better off having access to the US market. Look, so
I see someone importing a Tesla. It's always wanted one, you know. So with like $20,000 you can possibly 25.
How much is a Model Y? That's right?
No, it's a Cybertruck.
Oh, the Cybertruck.
That monster is so ugly.
No, but I think we're better off with free trade and free enterprise. Like free market capitalism, does better with free trade between nations, and I'm an ardent advocate of that. So, so I think the silver lining, with all this volatility and chaos and heartburn and meltdown, the world will have more free trade, and I think it's important from time to time for the world to reset, right? Because you had this regime or these arrangements. Because if you actually think about it from a historical perspective, China was a very poor, undeveloped country 40, 50 years ago. And the idea was, let's empower them to be the world's factory, and they benefit from building industry and supplying the rest of the world cheaply. They are a small economy. So it's okay for them to be protectionist. It's not like their customer nations at the time could have sold much in China anyway, right? Because they didn't really have a meaningful consumer market. So in the 1980s and 90s, it was okay if they had high tariffs to help protect their nascent market, and the US opened up to them to help them build export capacity. But the world has changed now. China is no longer a small economy. It's no longer undeveloped or poor. They have a meaningful consumer market. And so it's time to recalibrate, the tariff regime, to say, well, what's actually, if the tariff regime that they enjoy for the goose is good for the gander. So and I think it's perfectly fine to have that conversation where you're saying, this is how it's been for the last 30, 40, 50 years, but things have changed. You're a much bigger economy in a much stronger position. And
negotiations, to be fair, had failed. I mean, you look at EU and China have been negotiating, I think, for the last 10 years. In fact, to the effect that EU was accusing China of subsidies in their automotive industry and tariffs as well. So EU had to slap China with, I think, 34% tariffs, and that was just back in January.
Yep.
And those negotiations had been going on for 10 years. So I agree with you, Zia, that you need Trump to reset the equation. Now let's come back home to Zimbabwe. What does this actually mean for Zimbabweans and Zimbabwe and other small nations?
Well, so I'll look at it from the fiscal point of view. So duty tariffs had actually become a significant line in the fiscal revenue. With what we've seen with direct taxes actually coming off in a big way. And the fact that we are generally a net importer.
Yes.
So if you're an importing nation, it means actually in that, it also sort of creates that problem that Trump was also trying to solve in a way where you've got a sustained trade.
Well, it starts now as that's a good way of looking at it, because it starts as a budget deficit because you can't raise enough capital, and then comes back as a trade deficit. Right?
Yes, so you've got that kind of scenario. So obviously it's not something that we're prepared for, and it's actually bad that it's coming at a time when because
we need
of
the revenues.
Yes, again because of Trump's policy direction. We are not getting support for aid, and NGO support is not coming through at the same level. So you've got the government coffers being hit from so many angles, and yet the need is actually it's keeping on rising. So immediately we're going to feel the pinch of that. If we were, for now, the US, our trade with the US is quite small relative to the other nations. But what I'm seeing right now is we're seeing this thing actually extending to, so it won't be just the US, but I'm seeing the nations actually recalibrating the trading arrangement and agreements with different countries. So I don't see a situation where would have zero tariffs with the US and still be charged or charging the other nations 15, 20, 30. It doesn't make sense.
What do you think of China? I mean, they also put reciprocal zero tariffs on African countries. What are they going to do with their products that they were selling to the US? Do you think they're going to dump that product to Africa and the rest of the world? Or they're going to have to again recalibrate their relationship with the rest of the world?
I think it's part of ongoing negotiations. So obviously it's easier. China was a direct rival to the US, and they are in that sort of, if you were to put nations into groups in terms of the GDP, you'd say maybe China, US, they are in the top tier, right? So there's that direct rival between them. And then there are these other nations that really, even if there's no way that we could have told the US to say, you know what, this way. So you'd expect that these other nations that probably second, third tier, right, will be, because they don't have an option. They have to play ball. They still benefit from having these relations in a way. But I think over time, even the second tier and even at the top tier itself, sanity will have to prevail. So China coming into Africa, I think it's also because now Africans, even those ones that are vehemently opposed to what President Trump is doing, I think even their cabinet or whatever kind of executive meetings, they're actually discussing this. It might actually be a good idea if we imagine how much we could have saved if we didn't have tariffs coming from this other country or etc. Or maybe what more we could do, what more trade we could do if we also didn't have tariffs for inbound sort of product. So it's happening across level. So China, when it looks at Africa, is such a, is more like, big brother, much younger brother, as it were. So they would not have problems.
The stepchild.
Yeah, they would not have problems with making those adjustments. But I think this can be isolated kind of situations. It has to be across the world. Okay. So eventually, by the time we get to December, the level of tariffs globally will be much less. Okay. And I think countries will start treating each other with some level of fairness.
Yeah. Two things that I would want you to at least, give us a glimpse of your thoughts around. The first one has to do with bad behavior amongst countries. And the preferred way of correcting bad behavior has always been sanctions before war. And now it seems like, tariffs could be a useful tool in correcting bad behavior. Am I correct in making that assertion?
Yeah, look, I've never been a fan of sanctions. No matter who is placing them on the other country, I just don't think, if you look at the history of them, they just don't. There aren't examples in the historical record of a nation that was behaving in a particular fashion, and then they were sanctioned, and then the leaders decided, we need these sanctions to go away, and then they changed their behavior, right? So I don't think they're effectual, number one, and I think they tend to hurt. They tend to hurt. The unintended consequences of sanctions is they hurt people who are not the intended targets. So I don't think they're a useful tool in the geopolitical toolbox. You don't get the outcomes that you're looking for from sanctions. So I'm not a big fan of sanctions, and I think they'll fail. War, again, it's just awful, right? And destructive. And I think that, one of the things that I am optimistic about in the 21st century is that we've moved away from an imperialistic framework. So if the three of us were nation states, right, in an imperial framework, one of the ways I could make myself better off, bigger, more powerful, wealthier, is invade your lands and take them over, right? But today, wealth is not about territory and land, right? I mean, wealth is about intellectual property. It's about Google doesn't own massive amounts of mineral rights and land. They own intellectual property, and the same is true for Apple and Amazon and Nvidia and all these multi-trillion-dollar companies where the wealth resides. So if you invade California tomorrow, you can't take over,
the intellectual property.
The intellectual property. You're not, those companies will instantly move from being worth trillions to being worth nothing, right?
I'm just aware of our time. So could you crystallize? Do you think that tariffs are very...
I think compared to sanctions in war, they're much better. Like in terms of taking us to prosperity by having a level playing field with zero or low tariffs. I think any move to bring us to zero tariffs or very low tariffs is a positive one.
It's a positive. Then the other thing,
maybe let's just comment about how Zim reacted, because I think there's a lot of chatter on social media on whether it was a good thing to also go for zero tariffs against the US, or maybe there's another school of thought that says maybe we're too, we could have done things differently. I don't know what you guys think, but like I've already mentioned, it's not like we could have taken any hard stance against the Americans.
No, I think it's wise.
Yeah,
Remember, we were out of AGOA.
Yes.
This is
ourselves and Seychelles.
Yeah.
We are not enjoying the free zero tariff regime that the other countries in AGOA,
signatories of AGOA,
were enjoying.
So
It just made. I think it was just a backdoor way.
Yeah, backdoor, because it opens a direct way in which we're now negotiating with the American, with the Trump administration. So I think that's good. The other thing that I want you to focus on is trade being tied to aid. Netanyahu when he was in the Oval Office, a journalist asked this question that because Israel had reduced their tariffs to zero, does it mean that America would reduce their tariffs to zero as reciprocation and not the 10% minimum tariff? And Trump sort of, indicated that while that is true and while that is good that Israel has gone to zero, but Israel is supported, up to $3 billion or so US dollars annually in aid. And so what I mean is he's looking at aid and trade, which is something that is peculiar and new in this new world phenomena that we are seeing with Trump. Do you think that's the correct way of looking at aid? Because before, aid was purely looked at as soft power, whereas America now has something significant that they actually offer the world. They're saying we actually offer you a market. And we've seen with the rise of China that having access to an American market it's a game changer for any particular country. And if America can extend that to a particular country, therefore that country will not necessarily need aid. Could you see this as a new phenomenon, or is still too early for us to see how that crystallizes, aid and trade?
Oh, well, it looks like President Trump just looks at, the contribution in general. So what the U.S. is contributing to the rest of the world, whether in terms of trade or aid. And it's probably, we've seen that with how he quickly moved in to disband U.S. aid. And then just after that, at a time when people were still trying to understand what he's done, he's moving the next step, which is trade. So he's probably looking at it as like in total, that this is the contribution of the U.S. to the world, both in terms of the soft power you are talking about, but actually in the area of trade. And it's actually interesting, as I've always wondered, that like in this part of the world, when sometimes policymakers look at the Western world, they project it as such a devilish society that is out to recolonize us again, and we've got our friends in some other place, whether it's look east and whatever. But yet, in terms of the actual contribution to our society, you'd find that these Western countries were contributing more, especially in terms of aid, right? And I think one would maybe President Trump will be looking at it and say, you know what, I think it's time that we start looking at that the whole spectrum of the contributions coming. And you can't.
That's another third element.
Yeah. So even in terms of the geopolitics, he has to take into consideration the proportion of trade that you are doing in this particular state, but also how much aid you are receiving from them.
And if you are receiving aid and trade, you can't badmouth
exactly.
America.
Basically, that's what it says. So they might is probably saying, okay,
vote
fine.
against the US at the UN.
And all of a sudden, after that, now it became very clear that we are really dependent on this aid. And you'd expect our all-weather friend to say, no, don't worry. The US
will plug that gap.
Yeah, the US was giving you what?
But it's always
800 million. We are giving you 1.2 billion. They're just like, you know what, guys? Sorry, I can't help
Take care of your
own.
Yeah.
Who is your brother? It's more like the biblical story of the Good Samaritan. There's someone who's supposedly supposed to be your closest friend, but you see a friend in need is a friend indeed.
Okay. On that very biblical note, we bid you good night and enjoy yourself. Otherwise, we've had a fantastic conference. Thank you very much, PAAB, for hosting us and for sponsoring this particular conversations and debates. We thoroughly enjoyed it. And thank you very much to the panelists who came along and the chats we've had. They've been good, great. Otherwise, have yourself a wonderful week ahead or weekend. Cheers.
Thank you.
Cheers.